fall. The smell of sandalwood, pecan pie setting on the table, the daily reminder that flannel shirts somehow exist. Autumn is such an underrated time of year, and one of its best holidays is not the one where bloodthirsty zombies shuffle their way through lines of people to get at the best deals in the market. No, I'm talking about the holiday where bloodthirsty zombies shuffle their way through lines of people to get at the best costume deals on the market. See, there's a little bit of a difference there. Halloween is just around the corner, and I haven't put out a video that discusses this wonderful holiday in, like, ever. So then, will it be a video about the complicated rise and fall of 80s slasher features? Or a cartoon close to my childhood like Scary Godmother or Beetlejuice? There could be many to talk about, and I think I found one. A family-friendly fantasy adventure about overcoming grief and depression through Irish folktales and pagan traditions. Well, come on, at least it takes place on Halloween. Okay, typically this movie's not commonly associated with Halloween, but regardless, it is a very well-made and comforting movie to watch. Hailing from acclaimed Irish studio Cartoon Saloon, Tom Moore's second film in his unofficial Irish trilogy looks into a family shattered by the absence of a significant figure in their life that leads them to connect not just their familial ties, but the common folks' connection to the tales of the past. And since it's turning 10 years old, it's good to look back at not just why this movie works so well in tackling this very complicated subject matter, but as a significant step for a studio that showcased the wonderful talent of the team behind it, seeing as every film, except one, has been nominated for Best Animated Feature for years at the Academy. And not one year have they won it, but maybe they will. But like every song, it needs a key motive. And it starts with the Celtic Tiger. Wait, last time I checked, this is not an economics channel. Times are certainly good back in the 90s. At least when we're talking about the dry and boring industry that is economics. Ireland was booming in productivity, especially tax incentives, which led foreign companies to come in droves to get that sweet, juicy 12.5% corporate taxation rate. And if we're talking in the film and animation side, you got plenty. Remember when you were a kid and you saw those Don Bluth movies? Especially the ones that smelled like really bad haggis. They were produced in Ireland. This, in no small part, brought a lot of attention to Irish animation, and kickstarted a small resurgence in the craft, at least when it comes to independent productions. The Celtic Tigers seemed to be going up past 2000s and had no signs of going down. Well, then you had September 11th, FMD, increased property values, foreign competition, a reliance on foreign companies which had an inverse effect on climate change, and finally, boom, 2008 comes around, and everyone, not just Ireland, got hit harder than a Zinedine Zidane headbutt to the chest. But none felt the effects more than the poor population, as much like with the United States, there was, say with me now, wealth inequality, especially if you were in the fishing industry, which led to a lot of frustration among local fishermen, and some would take their frustrations out on seals. One of these sites was visited by director Tom Moore, who witnessed it while taking his son on vacation 10 years ago before the release of Song of the Sea. In several interviews, including one from Nathan Meltz and Shira Dents, he said, "When we asked why there were so many dead seals on the beach, our landlady said local fishermen were killing them out of frustration with falling fishery stocks. She said it wouldn't have happened years ago, when there was a belief system that deemed seals sacred because they were the souls of people lost at sea, or actual selkies. That started me thinking that folklore and superstitions serve functions beyond entertainment, or quaint stories for tourists. They bind people to the landscape, and that is being lost." Now at this point in time, Cartoon Saloon hadn't had a major theatrical release yet. Still, Tom's interest in subjects such as history and Irish mythology got the creative gears grinding when it came to the studio's first film, Secret of Kells, alongside co-founders like Paul Young and Nora Toomey. Song of the Sea is essentially an open conversation with the greater population of Ireland to understand their roots and where their most established traditions hail from.
As I said, from the very earliest inspiration, this idea that there was a belief system in the country that persisted for a long time, in Ireland and all around the world, I suppose, that these worlds were very close together, and especially around Halloween, these two worlds kind of, the veils between them get a bit thinner, I suppose.
And how Tom was made to tell that story was through a family's loss and rediscovery, which could only be told through the animation. To understand Song of the Sea, it would be a good idea to know what happens in it. The film opens with a mother tucking her son into bed as she sings him a song that becomes a movie's leitmotif. Suddenly, she disappears, and we cut to years later. The boy's a preteen, and he has little to no respect for his mute little sister. Their father is isolated from Ben's attention, but dotes on the little sister, while the grandmother is an ideologue who doesn't approve of Ben and Saoirse living on the island. One night, Saoirse takes Ben's prized possession, a seashell given to him by his late mother, and starts to play it. Little balls of light then direct her to an old chest containing a Selkie skin, and she discovers that she is part Selkie. However, the grandmother finds her out on the beach and assumes the worst, taking the children away from their father the next day, far into the mainland. Unbeknownst to the children, the spirits and fairies have awakened with anticipation to once again hear a Selkie sing once more, and free their spirits from a witch's stony clutches. And this leads to the two kids on a journey to go back to their home, while also growing closer together and mending their family's broken past. Now, you wouldn't need to know much about Irish folk tales to understand the various creatures and mythologies are told in this film. The stories of figures such as Maclear, Macha, and Shanachie have their place in the story, but more act like looking glasses to many of the other characters. Although, the great Shanachie's interest in stories doesn't reflect well into his real-world counterpart, as that was an aspect left out of the film during production. Animation plays a very important role in the storytelling, and people who work at Cartoon Saloon have crafted a style that keeps getting better for each new project they produce. Character design, compositing, background layouts, and especially this film's strongest element being the storyboard. Storyboarding is an integral part that any film needs, and the best ones take precious care in making every scene have a point. Each expression and action must tell the story through visuals alone, taking into consideration the scene of Connor looking out to the coast, deep in thought and clearly in mourning. Cut to Ben coming up and dragging his sister, crying out like any kid who wants attention. You might even hear Ben's voice is a little quiet, and it implies that Connor isn't quite attuned to his frustrations. Then Connor leans down to pick up and dote on Saoirse, leaving Ben on top of the lighthouse, with a sequence ending in Ben, now left all up alone, looking out towards the sea with watery eyes. This scene tells us a couple of things about these two characters through the sequence of events. One is their relationship to each other, and how despite Ben being his son, Connor seems to be more appreciative of his mute daughter, showcasing the father and son being kind of estranged. And secondly, it focuses on how both characters seem to cope with the loss of a significant model in their lives, Connor and his wife, and Ben with his mother. Two different kinds of love that have been crushed and both not knowing how to move on. Art direction plays a lot with how environments, people, and the unknown are directed, and the key component to both the direction and artistry found in all Cartoon Saloon projects, not just Song of the Sea, is its use of shape language. Shape language is conceptually used a lot when it comes to art and animation, and can very easily elicit a response to the viewer without a single word of dialogue being spoken. A circle represents something being harmless and changeable that could be friendly or organic. A square is solid and sturdy, and is supportive yet obstinate to being changed. And the triangle is dynamic and very direct, which can also be unpredictable and quite dangerous. For Cartoon Saloon, these shapes are used in the many background and character designs, going from the minor to the most integral. The Irish trilogy that contains Secret of Ceol, Song of the Sea, and Wolfwalkers are all examples in how shape language tells their stories. Secret of Ceol uses their three shapes to connect the three key establishments that vehemently oppose one another. The forest is drawn with curves and measures itself to being very comforting and soft. The abbey is rigid and intimidating, with cuts of stone going all around the cathedral, whilst the Vikings and their ships are drawn very serrated and directional, giving off a sense of danger that would come to pass by the film's third act. Wolfwalkers does an almost similar approach to its design, with nature and its followers being wavy and free-flowing, while the town of Kilkenny and its invaders are stuck in quadrangle structures built around one man's stubborn autocracy. That same philosophy also appears in this movie as well, though from a very different point of view. Unlike the two movies mentioned, this one takes place in 1980s Ireland, somewhere around Dublin. The environment is a lot more complicated and not so easily defined by shapes, but instead a mix of all of them when it comes to the astral world, with fairies, owl witches, weird old guys with lots of frickin' hair. Some of these shapes can very much switch to shift too, like with the witch Maka, who is designed like a very warm and comforting circular shape, which plays into dissuading the main character's innocence when she reveals her other half. The lighthouse and the town by the coast are melancholic, but with their own personality, until you get to Dublin, where pollution fills the air and a feeling of claustrophobia sets in. Not every character or place is made to be good or evil. It's shaped into what you make of it, and its interpretation of the whole picture, being that everything goes through hills and valleys of emotional depths, and that every shape is prone to their flaws.
The mother's absent, but also very present all through the story. And one of the ways that we do that is, of course, by having these callbacks to her whenever Ben is drifting off and remembering her, but also, you know, in the composition, we try and remind the audience of that first composition we saw in the prologue, that very circular composition where Ben was kind of protected in that kind of womb-like space by constantly going back to that circular composition. Then other times, the way we use the colours and maybe the music and the lighting, that same circle can almost seem like a trap, or like that they're caught in a spider's web.
Now, as visually impressive as Song of the Sea's animation can be, it's not the only draw that gets people willing to watch this over and over again. It's always about the characters, and especially the character mirrored to them. The classic example when it comes to character counterparts is usually drawn from The Wizard of Oz. Miss Elmara Gulch is obviously a direct reflection of the Wicked Witch of the West, as a patrician who has much of the community under her thumb, and is easily frustrated with the antics of Dorothy and her dog Toto, even wanting to destroy the pup after a biting incident.
If you don't hand over that dog, I'll bring a damn suit that'll take your whole farm. There's a law protecting folks against dogs that bite.
This materializes as Dorothy's fear, and directly correlates with the actions that the Wicked Witch would execute on.
Just try. I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
As much as people like to refer to Wizard of Oz as essentially an extended dream sequence that reflects the people in Dorothy's life as allies or obstacles to overcome, it's more so Hollywood using shorthand to pull together a story consumable for a wide audience. Unlike in the book, where those reflections are as prevalent and the witch isn't that big of an antagonist and looks very different. But ever since the movie became a cinematic classic, many other writers have become fond of picturing characters in different clothing. Like, say, the duality of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or Frodo to Gollum, mirrors of what they could become if the hero isn't careful on their journey. This happens quite a lot in children's stories, as like with The Wizard of Oz, it serves as a glimpse into the psychosis of the mind without interruptions from the uninvolved. These range in a spectrum and depends on how much we can allow that world to exist based on our tolerance, which is why lots of folks don't like it when the many shifts in terms of the narrative can be whisked away with the whole "it was just a dream" excuse.
Yes, but theoretically, if someone watched the events of that simulation from start to finish, only to find out that none of it really happened, I mean, you don't think that should be just like a giant middle finger to them?
Well, hopefully they would have enjoyed the ride.
I don't know, man. I think you piss a lot of people off that way.
Coraline is a very interesting example, as in the movie version, the main heroine believes the other world to be all an imagination until discovering its existence is not a fabrication, and quickly realizes her mistake in letting those entities get too close. I would like to really talk about this film more. Heck, it was actually going to be a video on his channel, but considering the situation with this guy, yeah, we'll just dump it in the well for now. Instead, how does Song of the Sea use this narrative device? Well, instead of letting the characters escape into the astral world comes to them, initiates the plot moving forward, and the characters follow along as they find a path back home. Like with the fairies in the mound, who discover Cherche and reveal her sulky nature to Ben. Originally, they were going to be characters represented by children in Dublin, but were cut out due to time. And you already know about the story about the ferryman and the Grey Shawnee, so that doesn't need repeating. But the most significant characters are Maclear and Macha. Their actions and characteristics heavily simulate their real-world counterparts, and sometimes not in the obvious fashion. Maclear and Connor are obviously interconnected to the other, with many shots drawing similar angles and mannerisms to their grief and stony disposition. He cherishes Saoirse, who has a resemblance to his late wife, ignores much of Ben's frustrations, and actively punishes him for his troublesome gestures.
Let me out!
Stop it, Ben! Will you?
He doesn't even stand up for himself when the grandmother takes the kids away, because his mother knows best, and he's too ashamed and grief-stricken to oppose it. However, even the grandmother isn't totally unaffected by this tragedy. Macha and the grandmother could be seen as a direct homage to the Wicked Witch of the West, but unlike in that film where the murder of the witch brings back joy to the land, it's Ben and Saoirse giving back the old owl's bottled up emotions. In one scene, after Saoirse is brought back in by the grandmother, the old lady starts to belittle his son and gets very upset, leaving the room with this sentence.
This is no place for children, Connor. This is no place for a family. That's the end of it now. I need to take my medicine.
Back at her home, she likes to keep to herself and her world, as if her medication dulls her into a sense of calm and relief. It can be from the aches and pains of her body, or it could be the pain of seeing her son becoming more and more distant by the day. This very much is the same case with Macha, and serves as a way for us to understand that literally bottling up your emotions will not solve the grieving process.
I have been so lost for so long. Oh, please forgive me. I couldn't bear to see my son suffering so much.
This method of storytelling is simple to understand from a general audience standpoint. It's not a Charlie Kaufman story. But even then, I'd highly recommend Anomalisa for all you folks who want to see more adult content. But take that aside, simplicity is not always a bad thing, and this film has several underlying messages. One key thing to note about Cartoon Saloon is that it has an intrinsic attitude towards the environment. From their short film made with Greenpeace and their main filmography of Irish films, you can draw a connection from the mythological figures of old to present-day efforts to battle climate change. In Song of the Sea, the landscape, for instance, is littered with debris of old, discarded human junk, like washing machines and the like, scattered among the ferries and the circles. The ferry circle, where Ben and Saoirse visit, is a roundabout, and there is even a comment from the ferryman about the sudden rise of seal sightings. The film isn't just a reflection of the common Irish person reconnecting with their traditional roots, but it most certainly highlights efforts to protect the land around it from eroding the natural state of its country's environment. All this can be inferred from the character's actions and process of events, but it never breaks apart the main core of the story, and that is our main protagonist's stake in the whole plot. Now, some of you would assume that Saoirse, that name is so hard. Now, some of you would assume that Saoirse would be considered the protagonist of this picture, as it's her discovery and resolve to sing her songs of the mythological folk that would make her deserving of it. However, that title goes to her brother Ben, and if you know anything about how stories work, then he follows the prototypical template popularized by Joseph Campbell, and that is the hero's journey. Variations are aplenty, but basically put, the hero is drawn into the conflict, faces challenges that test his will, and there is a transformation that follows a brief defeat until concluding in their return. And upon reflection, they have changed from the person they were to the person they are now. Ben starts as a fairly selfish, unreasonable boy who tends to pick on his little sister, which starts from seeing his mother disappear and leads to him presenting his sister's birth as a cause of it.
You can only come with me if you obey my orders at all times. I'm the oldest and that's the rule. If you put one step out of line, I do this.
Ben is also very individualistic, and his clothing and earthly materials reflect that, like his Walkman or his superhero cape. The highlight, though, has to be his adherence to going into the water, being terrified of what may happen, and always wearing a life preserver even on dry land. This draws very heavily into his unwillingness to accept what happened to his mother, being that his mother is a Selkie and had to make the ultimate sacrifice to save her child. Even before he finds out the truth, he reasons that the water to be dangerous and likes to keep people away, much like his father keeps his family away from their origins. Once Ben is taken from his place of home, his journey begins once he discovers his sister's magical abilities and the existence of folks just like her. Saoirse acts as Ben's guide and leads him through his inhibitions and challenges, to accept his sister for who she is, and to let go of Bronach. Bronach does mean sorrow after all, and it's through witnessing the freedom of Saoirse's actions that Ben can see her as not some burden, but a sister who needs a brother. It culminates in an intense sequence of Maka and Raoul trying to break into the attic, as he finally makes a transformation into the big brother he neglected to be. He comforts Saoirse, and begins to teach her the hymn that his mother gave him long ago.
I shouldn't have been so mean to you. It's not your fault. It never was. I should have been a better brother to you.
We then proceed to his atonement by facing his fears, removing the bonds of his life jackets and going head first to retrieve the Selkie coat for his sister to live. And through trials and tribulations, magic and discovery, hesitation and temptations, Ben is given in return his mother. But what he truly wants is his sister. The first thing he says to his mother is not for her to come back, but to give back his sister.
Oh, please, wait. Please don't. Please don't take her from us.
At this moment, Ben has completed his cycle of grief, accepting the loss of his mother and choosing to be the best big brother in the world, as told by his mum. I do think people who watch this movie tend to look at Ben as an unlikable brat. Yet, like any character in any media that has existed, it's not about what they are, but what they can become. Think about how, like in Breaking Bad, where we first had sympathy for Walter White, but slowly begin to despise him throughout his underhandedness throughout the seasons.
It was perfect, but no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego. You just had to be the man.
Whichever path the leading person goes down, what matters is their journey, as well as the audience's views on how we see people going through such similar situations. There is also a small, vapid response for the ending of Song of the Sea being too pristine or toothless for not letting Saoirse go to the astral plane with her mother, who she actually shares a connection with. However, when you take the whole film into account, Saoirse was heavily restricted from doing anything for herself. The times that Ben kept her on a leash from going into the water, Connor throwing away her coat into the sea, the grandmother taking her away from the island. Once she puts the coat on, she tasted the freedom to do what she wants to do, without interference, without prejudice. So when the time comes to make the choice, Saoirse chooses to stay with the family, who has shown real growth in understanding who she is as an individual. This same sentiment is very much shared by me as well as director Tom Moore, which he elaborated in the film's commentary track.
Nora had the idea when we were recording Little Lucy, long after we'd recorded Lisa, that Saoirse should very clearly be the one deciding to stay. So we added in this line, just in this shot, that luckily enough we'd storyboarded in with Saoirse's head turned towards us. She said she wants to stay, and so it works perfectly with the animation. And it really, really was important that everyone understood that this was Saoirse's decision, and she wasn't just a pawn in all of this, that she'd made a very clear decision to stay.
The beauty of Song of the Sea is that it doesn't have to over-explain itself in fear of people not getting its messages. Because grief comes in many different forms, and how these characters go in overcoming such tragedies is through a combination of self-acknowledgement and comfort in the people who love them most. Living in the past, refusing to make changes, withdrawal, or keeping your sadness inside are things Song of the Sea looks to overcome. I've been through my own cycles of grief, and I assume so have many of you watching. We feel a sort of disassociation with the world, and even with the anticipation to the coming of death. We can't help but feel lost. Now, with this in mind, I did put in the description a number of websites you can visit if you're feeling you need to talk to somebody or are going through the grieving process as we speak. We are all in some ways like Ben, Connor, Maka, and the rest. And I do believe that if we can come to an understanding through works like this film when it comes to sorrow, we may be able to accept the unexpected and be ready for a new reality. What's weird about looking back at Song of the Sea is that it wasn't the only animated film released that year when it went through the theme of grief and loss. The winner for the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, Big Hero 6, was also about overcoming the loss of a loved one, but in a superhero Marvel paint job. Now, I'm not trying to knock on anyone who actually likes this movie and they have very fond memories of it as a kid, and yes, it does handle this drama to a point, but it's just one of those films I never felt as satisfied with. Not its fault, but when it comes to handling its main dilemma, it's not as strong as something like Song of the Sea, or Princess Kaguya, or heck, even How to Train Your Dragon 2. Seriously, this year could have gone to anyone besides Big Hero 6. But in regards to its own stance, I find myself really enjoying this movie and how it decides to tell its narrative. I actually wanted to make a Cartoon Saloon video for a while after watching Wolfwalkers, but considering how much love that movie gets from everybody, I felt that Song of the Sea was probably in need for a reflection piece about what it meant to a lot of folks. How it helped the studio out from becoming obsolete, how it artistically explores Irish traditions and mythology through an animated lens, and how it opens many families up in how to understand bereavement and its complications. I see this film as incredibly beautiful in its way of storytelling, and you can chalk me up as a really big fan of Tom Moore and the rest of the Cartoon Saloon's work in general, whether it be the fictionalized construction of a book, a symbolic revolt against oppression through the perspective of a wolf, or a coming-of-age family adventure about letting go and embracing new paths in the swirling ocean we call life. Thanks so much for watching, and if you got any thoughts on this movie or others by Cartoon Saloon, be sure to share it down below in the comments. Subscribe if you like my content, and if you'd like to support me in any other way, you can head over to my Patreon where I post uncut videos early for all my patrons. It's your Brahman taking a quick swim with some friendly seals.